Okay, well, the topic of this segment is the psychology of disasters, or disaster psychology, and I told my colleague that I was doing this, and he said, well, what's it entitled? And I said, it's Psychology Disaster Psychology, and he said, well, then you're perfect for this. I'm not sure if he meant that as a compliment, but I'm sure he said it with all the love in his heart, because I can be a little bit of a disaster. The first thing that I wanted to bring up, because we all do it, and that's don't panic. We all panic for different reasons, and we have a lot of emphasis that's put on food storage, and that's just one aspect of it, of what we, of being prepared. But what does being prepared look like to you? Anybody want to volunteer, or do you want me to just read what I have in my notes? What can be? What does being prepared look like to you?
Well, the traditional in the church thing is having enough food.
Food is food.
And that's where it stops. But those of us that have been around, Shane, do you have some feedback?
I just like to have a bunch of best friends.
There you go. Okay.
I figure they take care of me.
Well, and you know that's true. I was talking with you outside about some issues in my lawn, and I am a single person, but being prepared is important to me. But there's a lot of things that I don't know how to do. Like I can plant a fruit tree, but do I know how to prune it? Do I know how to take care of it? I don't. But I'm a part of a community, and I'm part of a neighborhood. And so part of being prepared is is being a part of a community, being part of things. So being prepared, I think, is also having something to contribute to the community, to family, and to your church. Because no one person can be completely prepared in every aspect that we talk about. And the important thing is, and that's why I emphasize don't panic, is that it doesn't require perfection. It does require intention. And there's a difference between perfection and intention, because intention can mean a few more cans of food. It can mean a little flour. It can mean extra blankets. It can mean a grab bag. It can be something. It can be emergency plans, emergency equipment, a few more minutes in the scriptures, a little more time helping a neighbor, simple acts of kindness. These are all things about being prepared, because when you're prepared and when you do these things, you do become a part of a community, no matter how big or how small it is. When you extend yourself outside of yourself, then you're a part of a bigger plan. Let's see. That's not what I don't know why that's there. So understanding the psychological effects and human behavior in disaster, which are very different. We can all say that we're cool, calm, and collected until a disaster hits. I'm a social worker. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. Before that, I was a social worker at McCady Hospital I did trauma in the emergency room. And I've met even the calmest of people who, in the situation of a disaster or of a trauma, everything goes out the window, and it's just getting through the experience. I'm going to go over some stages, and it's twofold. In fact, you got a handout. The first stages are phases I'm going to talk about are the stages of disaster and human behavior. The second part later on in the slideshow will be the stages of evacuation in disasters. And the stages are the same, but the reactions in the content is different. So the first is the threat stage. That's when a threat is identified and ignored. Like I'm sure we all heard there were some earthquakes in Provo. Was it Provo area? Down in that county. So we're aware of it, but we don't think too much about it, right? It's further away from us. And also, when the risk is the perceived risk is lower than the actual risk, we underestimate what's coming ahead of us, or are we going to denial about it? Also, in the threat stage is the unknown potential consequence of the disaster. If you don't know what is going to occur with a specific. Oh, sorry. I apologize. What a disaster. That's all I can say. What a disaster. What a threat. Yeah, and you were quick. You were good. That was so good to pick up on that stage that I was in.
Yeah.
So in the threat stage, even though there is this threat, we aren't interacting as well. We're not responding as well. We're still in our minds thinking, oh, that's over in Utah County. That's not here where we are. So that's part of the threat state. But it is when the uneasy feelings. Any of you get uneasy when you heard, wow, there's a 4.5, 4.2 earthquake?
Well, yeah, but if it's here, that's a whole different
But
thing
exactly.
than being somewhere else.
Exactly. And so, but we still feel a little bit uneasy because now we know it can happen. The other is the apathetic behavior. That's in Utah County. That's not happening to us. So we get a little bit comfortable. The next stage is the warning stage, which is a denial, where we're actually in denial of a real threat of loss or injury or death. And so we know it's there, but we kind of go into that denial of, oh, that happens to everybody else, not to me. And that's kind of a critical. Also, ignoring or misperception of warning signals. We ignore the danger. And that the other is feelings of uncertainty and discomfort. So by the time we get to the warning stage, we're starting to feel a little bit uncomfortable, but we're still not really engaging with the fact that something may be happening. In the impact stage, the sensory information is too much to comprehend. Can you imagine the chaos that occurs when something happens? And I think it's really important, the agencies and the organizations that we have, to keep the lines of communication open, because when I think about it, I think of a game we used to play when I was little, and that's a long time ago, but we did play it, where you sit in a circle and you start with a sentence and you repeat it, you whisper it to the next person, and then they whisper it to the next person to see what the actual statement is when it get back to you. Any of you play that?
Mm-hmm.
You probably
Yeah.
you remember that. Okay.
I remember it.
You remember that, and how often was the information that you got back accurate?
Almost never.
Never, and that was the fun of the game, and that's kind of what I think about in the impact stage. Some of the specific behaviors I'm going to jump down to are overreactive or ineffective, out of emotional control, apathy, which we already talked about, and nervous behavior, and which surprised me is lack of initiative, 75%. Only 10% remained calm with the overall picture and the potential leadership. 10% is not a lot when you think of a whole community.
Well, some of the earlier presentations talked about how we need to practice, and so that's why it's so important, because all of the other stuff shuts down. So just those few that have done some practicing actually are the ones that are able to respond.
It's true. I remember the very first trauma that I did in the emergency room. I was not prepared for it. It was my very first one. I wasn't prepared for what I was going to encounter. I wasn't prepared for what I would feel. But over time, it became natural for me. And I think that's the importance of preparation, is that over time it becomes natural to you. You have a natural response. I've been a social worker for 25 years, so I like to think that I would be able to remain calm in a situation, but there's so many factors that contribute to that. If it's a family member, if you're involved with a family member, if your whole entire home is wiped out. I think of the wildfires in California. I would like I said, I would like to say that I hope that my clinical experience would kick in, but there's no guarantees, and that's in that impact. The next phase is the recoil. Let's see, did we do that? Yeah. Go back. Is the recoil stage. Slow realization of damages, casualty, and injuries. If it's happening across town from you, you're not going to be thinking about the impact, right? You're going to be slower to respond because, again, we have this mentality of, oh, that happens to the Joneses, that doesn't happen to me. And then when it does happen to you, what happens is that sense of innocence is broken. Now we know something bad can happen to us. And so our perception of the world and of the event itself changes once we know that it can actually happen to us. There's a gradual return of awareness, reasoning, and recall. And then this is the one that I thought was really interesting, was a childlike emotional dependence, increased emotional expression, irrational anger, increase in activity, and simple social behavior. That's the people that are going to freak out, that are going to get angry. You know, why is this happening to me? Why did this have to happen now? And so we're not in our best state of mind at this point. The next phase is the rescue stage. And that's where, again, a lot of confusion, denial, a lot of anger and anxiousness, and surprisingly enough, feelings of guilt. Because how long have we been talking about being prepared?
Yeah.
Years, decades.
Generations.
And here we are, and we're caught unprepared. In this rescue stage too, a lot of people feel the need to talk. They need contact. They need social support, and they need comfort. The comfort and the reassurance. But if you think about it, if everybody's in chaos, where do we turn to in this rescue stage?
That's tricky.
It's tricky, and that will lead into some of the things that I'm going to just touch on a little bit about emotional health and well-being.
I mean, there's a lot of people here that are talking about what do we physically have to do.
It's always about what we physically have to do.
But probably the long term, I've got a daughter who is going through treatment for a traumatic situation that happened with her, and she's dealing a lot more emotionally than with what the physical
Absolutely.
stuff is. And I think that we kind of tend to say, oh, well, that's just emotional. We can get over that.
Yeah, we can get over it. Yeah.
And that'll be easy, and it's really not as easy as what we think it is.
No, it's not, because, and you know, people always think that it's the event itself that causes us the lasting damage. It's the event. It's the hurricane. It's the fire. It's the earthquake. It's the rape. It's the sexual assault. It's all the things that can become traumatic experiences for us. But in time, like you said, physically we heal from those things. Where the trauma lies and where the trauma causes us damage is, what did that event just say to you about you? In the case of an earthquake, in the case of something where your whole livelihood is wiped out, what is that going to say to you about you? I'm not safe. I'm nothing. Everything I've worked for is gone. And then life continues, and it continues to reinforce those belief systems that were established by what the trauma said to you about you. And, you know, comment?
That's like PTSD.
It is PTSD. It is. It is.
That's the next one.
Yeah.
You know,
Yep.
10 or 12 years ago, you didn't hear anything about it.
No, and
But now there's
people assume that, you know, PTSD. Well, I didn't go. People will say to me, "I didn't go to war." Well, you don't have to go to war to have PTSD. Absolutely, that is the outcome of individuals who have had traumatic experience in wars. But PTSD can occur with even, you know, for instance, I might be able to handle something happening to me that somebody else doesn't, and in part it's because of my own. Of each of our mental health, our mental stability, our awareness. And that's why I think this is such an important topic, is just being aware gives us an edge. It gives us a start. And hopefully if you're during having that experience, you can go, oh my gosh, I'm in the warning stage. I need to pay attention. Because education is always going to be power. But PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, it's post-traumatic. And going down to the post-trauma stage, which is the next stage, is when people begin to rebuild their lives. Some survivors, they say about 20%, develop psychological disorders, or acute psychological, which is what we're talking about, is the PTSD, where it actually filters in and starts to impact our daily acts of living, where we can't function, or where, because again, you may never go through an earthquake again, But if you go through an experience that triggers those same feelings that you had during the earthquake, you're going to have a traumatic and emotional response. And so PTSD is so much broader than what we were talking about even 10 years ago. The trauma stage, that's when when we have nightmares, when we have flashbacks, when we have fear, anxiety. And those are all emotional things. And we worry so much about our physiological support that, but if you're curled up in a fetal position in a corner, all the food that you have in your house is not going to do you a bit of good. If you don't have what you need emotionally to deal with what's at hand, to access those things, or to access the emergency things that are available to you. Passiveness and apathetic behavior. I thought that was an interesting one because you would think at this point, you can't be passive. There's no denying that something has happened. But you see, and again, it's so much based on our emotional resilience, and I'll talk about that in a little bit, of how we handle those things. I better scooch on because these are in the handout because I wasted so much time with my own disaster. If you go back to the second page, that's the stages of evacuations and disasters. And that's the same thing. There's the threat stage, which involves recognizable sounds, forecasted disaster. You can't deny it now. You see it. You see the flames coming. Evacuation is still possible during the threat stage. If we move on to the warning stage, then the danger is now imminent. Evacuation is not just available, but it's needed and important. And at this time, that's when we misconstrue, and based on our own perceptions, we look at the warning signals, and our reactions are often non-effective. The other part in the warning stage is a significant of people will refuse to evacuate. And I remember hearing that with the fires that were in California, there were people that would not evacuate. Some of them lost their lives, some of them did not, but nonetheless, in spite of the imminent danger, they refused to leave. The next stage is the impact phase, and that's that there's no denying. The disaster is a fact. Evacuation is inevitable in order to save life. Survivors at this point are overstimulated, they're confused. That's when you see people freaking out or shutting down, just depending on, we have that fight or flight center in our brain, and based on the way our body reacts to it, we fight, we flee, or we freeze. And so based on that is what's going to determine how a person reacts in this stage. The recoil stage is, again, the initial dangers have ended and survivors are now safe. Evacuation is acute now because of injuries and deaths that have occurred. Also, a significant proportion of survivors are unable to evacuate independently. And that's a whole new level of fear. That's a whole new level of fear of when you have people that rely on someone else in order to evacuate. And if they're not, then there's a real threat to their life and their livelihood. The rescue stage is when survivors are more or less safe. It's still, but evacuation is still acute because of the injuries and the damage. And now at this point, survivors, irrespective of what they wanted, what they originally said, they're ready to evacuate. So you see that at different stages, some people are more ready to evacuate than others. So in the post-trauma stage, that's when we're rebuilding, and a lot of people will evacuate and never come back in this stage. So I want to touch real quickly on the 7 components of mental health, and that's in-person therapy, community, again, having that community, having somebody outside yourself, your physical health, your intellectual health, your environmental health, your boundaries, and your self-care. And I can't talk enough about the importance of those emotional things that we need to do, because physically we're going to have a reaction, But oftentimes, well, those reactions are based on our emotional well-being, and these are things that you can prepare for. You know, we don't have to run out and buy up at the whole case lot. That's one part of it. A few years ago, I decided to invest in a freeze dryer, and I love it. I love to cook, I love to freeze dry, and I've probably got more food than I'm going to ever need. But I do it with that in mind, that it's not going to be just for me. That's my hope, is that I have enough for my needs and the needs of my family, but also because it's become a hobby for me. And so it's something that I enjoy. But if I can't access that food, if I can't access it, then it's of no good to me or nobody else. And I have people that know. I store it in the crawl space of my home. I have people that know the food's there, so that if anything should happen to me, or if I should become incapacitated in some way and the food is needed, there are people outside myself that know where it is. Resiliency is the result of good mental health, reduced psychological distress. I'm not going to go over these other ones. These are also phases, except this one, the heroic phase. And I put that chicken on there not because it represents me, but because it kind of does today. But because in this stage, that's when you see people running around like chickens with their heads cut off. Kind of a graphic example when you're talking of trauma.
Like that image.
Yeah, I did too. It's characterized by a high level of activity with a low level of productivity, which means, you know, I'm going to rush in, but I'm in panic myself, so how am I going to be effective in helping others? There's a sense of altruism, and community members exhibit adrenaline-induced rescue behavior, and this phase passes quickly. So you've got somebody that's all gung-ho, but then the adrenaline dies down, and they can't function, and then oftentimes we're in the way. So being aware of that is important. And then, of course, the honeymoon phase, where we can go into denial, and the reconstructive phase again. I say don't panic, and because I truly believe this, and I think of, if you'll forgive me for addressing scripturally, I believe it's in Matthew 20, the Lord of the Vineyard. He goes and he gets people to help. He goes out first, and he gets some that come, and they work all day long. He goes out a second time, and they work half a day. He goes out a third time, and they work a couple hours. But when it comes time to be paid, they're all paid the same. And people were not happy about that. And you know, there's so many different circumstances in life that make it hard for us to prepare. It can be financial, it can be emotional, it can be our living situation. But I believe that parable applies to being prepared. Maybe I have a lot of food that I've put away, but I don't have this, or I don't have that. But when we all come together with the intention of handling the disaster in strong and informed ways, it doesn't matter when we enter into the preparation stage, as long as we're in the process of preparing, and I believe that we'll be okay. That may just be my Pollyanna view of life, but I adhere to it, because not everybody can go out and have a year's or 2 years supply of food or emergency equipment, but they can have those few cans. Or they can have extra blankets. They can have those things that I mentioned in the beginning. It doesn't matter what time you enter the phase of preparation, that if the intention is there and if we're doing it, we'll be prepared, so there's no need to panic. And then last of all, in the Doctrine and Covenants 38:30, but if you are prepared, you shall not fear. And I think that's the most important thing, is that if our intention is to be prepared, even if it's the minimal amount, if it's all we can do, but our intention to be prepared is there, that we'll be okay. Any questions? Any thoughts? Kind of fire hose the end there, but
Well, good message, really important.
thank you.
Thank you so much.
You are welcome. Thank you.